Thanks for joining us on This Week in Health IT Influence. My name is Bill Russell, former healthcare CIO for a 16 hospital system and creator of This Week in Health IT, a channel dedicated to keeping health IT staff current and engaged. Today, we have a special episode. It's our 400th episode, and we're going to take a look back at the last 3.5 years. We're going to see what we've been talking about over those 3 years. What were we talking about 3 years ago? How far have we come? Who have we had on the show? What did they have to say? And really celebrate their contributions to the community over that time. You're also going to get a little bit of a behind the scenes look at building of a podcast from 28 downloads from our first episode. And I wasn't sure I was going to do episode number 2 to really over 400 something thousand downloads in the last 3 years. Special thanks to our Influence Show sponsors who are investing in our mission to develop the next generation of health leaders, Sirius Healthcare and Health Lyrics. And since this is our 400th episode, I want to call out our channel sponsors as well who are investing in that same mission. They are VMware, Hill-Rom, Starbridge Advisors, McAfee, and Aruba Networks. Today, I am excited to introduce Tess Kellogg to you. She is the executive editor of This Week in Health IT, writer and head of marketing and other duties as assigned. Thus is the nature of a startup. Good morning, Tess, and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Bill. Thanks for having me. As if you had a choice.
Yeah, we had to figure out how to do this 400th episode. We talked about a lot of different things, and quite frankly, I wanted to have you on the show. We have such great conversations off the air. I thought, people would benefit from the conversations because you're fairly new to healthcare. Let's say about a year, or you're about a year into your healthcare tenure. Is that about right?
Yes. You poached me right out of well, I had quite a few industries before that, but if it makes you feel better, a lot of them have the same issues that healthcare faces today. So
it's interesting because we now have 3 staff people who are in addition to myself. There's 3 staff people. We have 3 contract writers as well on the staff, so we're growing. But one of the things that I think happens as people do this for some period of time is you listen to every podcast episode because that's part of the nature of being the executive editor. You come up to speed real quick. You get to hear from industry leaders, from John Halamka, Darren Dworkin, and you get to hear from Aaron Meary, you get to hear from Tressa Springman, you get to hear from just these great leaders, and we're having this conversation and you're reviewing all this material. And it's really interesting. The conversations we had early on were, I'm not really sure I understand healthcare, to now we have some pretty dynamic conversations around what healthcare could do better. It's been fun.
Yeah. And I made a joke about that the other day about how I think I deserve some sort of accreditation because of my exponential growth listening to this show. And Drexa Ford also told me I deserve hazard pay because I listen to you two talk to each other every 6 weeks. So we can talk about that later.
Man. And we'll have to think about that. This Week in Health IT accreditation. If you listen to, 20 or more shows, 30 or more shows a year, you get an accreditation of some kind. But today we're going to turn the tables a little bit, and you're going to be the host. You're going to get to ask the questions, and I'm going to tell the stories stories of really the beginning of the podcast. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to step through year by year. We're going to talk about 2018. What were we talking about? 2019, 2020, and just move on from there. So I'm going to hand it over to you and let you ask questions. What would you like to talk about?
Yeah, well, with 2020, we definitely saw the explosion of podcasts, right? I mean, everyone and their mother saw the opportunities that were there to start sharing insight and focusing on industry innovation. But I mean, you stepped into the scene in the beginning of 2018. So do you want to, podcasts were big, but they aren't nearly as big as they are now. So how did you end up where you're at? What compelled you to do this to yourself?
It is interesting because it seems like there's a new podcast every week popping up, and there are a ton of them out there. But, when I was the CIO at St. Joe's, we had 700 staff in the IT department. We had 150 contractors. We had 18,000 total care providers across St. Joe's. And I really became aware of 2 things. First is I was in a position to have great conversations that I wish more people were privy to. And I would talk to like former NSA staffer talking about security, or I'd be sitting there around a round table with 5 or 6 other CIOs, and we were talking about their strategy and what was working and what wasn't working. I'd get a chance to sit across from CFOs and other industry leaders discussing their hopes and dreams for healthcare and where it could go. And I just sat there and I thought, man, I wish my entire staff could hear this. I wish my entire health system could hear this conversation. And too often they don't get a chance to do that because not everybody goes to a conference. Not everybody gets to sit at that table. And I recognized that the value of those conversations. I wanted to bring it to more people. That was the first thing. But the second thing was that every day it seemed like my staff could use a boost in terms of staying current. And let me tell you what I mean by that. I did consulting for the better part of 20 years of my career, and I consulted for great companies in finance and manufacturing, defense, aerospace, consumer goods, and I got to see how they were applying technology to efficiency problems, to consumer experience, to marketing, to supply chain, to just about any area you could think about. And it felt like every time I got on a plane, I was getting smarter because I was getting introduced to all these new concepts of how different industries were doing things. And as I looked around my staff, I realized, and for me as the CIO, I was so focused on what was going on in healthcare, so focused on the problems that were in front of me that it was hard to stay current, and I wasn't spending the time to stay current. And so that's the second thing I really wanted to address. And so we started a podcast early on to address those two things. And as you know, the mission: amplify great thinking to develop the next generation of health leaders and propel healthcare forward. And what I do now is I read everything I can find. If I think someone says something really interesting, I invite them to be on the show. And I assume that you aren't reading the stuff I read. So if I have them on the show, you're not hearing it a second time. And I ask them different questions. I ask them questions not from a reporter perspective, but from a former CIO perspective, or from a former, I'm a former chief technology officer as well. So I have a technology background, a business background, and we just try to keep bringing those kinds of things to light. I guess the second part of your question really is, why keep doing it when there's so many podcasts? And I think the reason is because there's so few focused on health IT. They may dabble in topics from time to time. They may even have a healthcare CIO on from time to time. But it's interesting. I've been told several times that you misnamed your podcast, that calling it health IT is old. And it means that, I'm dating myself, and eventually it's going to be the end of the show because we're tied to what's old. And I think it's only, I wanted it to be clear who we created the podcast for. And I don't think the name really matters that much. The fact that we have health IT instead of digital health or health innovation or anything to that effect, because those are the topics we're talking about. That's what we're bringing to health IT, is the topics and conversations around that. So if I thought, we were being redundant and there was no need for our show, we'll stop doing it, the next day, quite frankly. But I still think there's a great need for it. There's a lot going on in healthcare. And quite frankly, people are still listening, and the response is great. So we're going to keep doing it.
Yeah. And if you have any problems with branding or anything like that with your name, I'm the one who's going to have to deal with it. So
that's interesting. Since we brought you on, you haven't told me we need to rename the podcast. So that's a good thing.
I think there is something with digital health that has a lot of question marks around it, and it doesn't tie directly to an IT team. I mean, I was listening to our first few shows. I wasn't on the team until 2019. So I hadn't listened to a lot of our earlier podcasts, and I listened to our first few shows, and it's in the second show, you and David Chow are sitting down and debating what is digital, who owns digital in an organization. Is it the marketing team? Is it the IT team? Is it the COO? And your argument was that it has to be owned by a CEO because it has to be actual vision for an organization as a whole that each of those departments can step into. And so I think that ideally digital permeates an organization much beyond the IT department. So I think it makes sense that we are honing in on equipping those specific staffs in technology. But I think you're right that digital is something far greater than we
Tess,
can.
I'm sad that you listened to that first episode, because I know how much you've pulled our quality up as an organization. You're probably sitting there going, "How did he put this out?" To be honest, the first episode was picked up my iPhone, I went over to voice recorder, I hit record, and I put on like the headset with the microphone, and I just started talking into it. That was the extent of our recording capabilities at the first episode. So it is what it is.
Well, I will say I had my computer and the internal micro or volume turned all the way up, and I could barely understand it. So I'm glad we've come so far that you now have your own little setup over there. But speaking of those first few topics, what was the conversation? Where was the conversation at in health IT in 2018?
It's interesting, because I know for you it's going to feel like we're talking about the same exact things, because to a certain extent we are, but we're talking about them in little different ways. I pulled up our website. I'm looking at all the images, because early on we did we still do. Whoever the guest is, we have an image of the guest. So I remember what we were talking about. David Chow, we were talking about that first episode. We were talking about ransomware. David Benzema, we were talking about the role of the EHR and how the EHR was leading to physician burnout. And that's, we're still talking about that today. Sue Shea and I were talking about the role of women in healthcare and how important it is. And we talked about a sea change and some of those things. Drex and I are always talking about security. That always comes up. But we were talking about, that first year, Drex came on a handful of times, and we had some really good conversations just around a lot of different topics. This is what I like about Drex is he's one of those people that I can drift off and just talk about. We can talk about data, we can talk about leadership, we can talk about blockchain. We can go in a lot of different directions, which is kind of fun. My gosh, this is a stroll down memory lane. Charles Boise came on. We talked about adoption of AI in healthcare. A little later on that year, we had Dr. Anthony Chang on, who heads up the MedAI platform now, and he talked about AI and where we were at with regard to that, and we're still talking about that. John Halapka, we talked about cloud, the adoption of cloud. We talked about, this is the first year we talked about the adoption of cloud, and that's when he made his infamous quote: "The role of the CIO has changed totally." And now we didn't see that come to fruition until, I think, this past year through the pandemic. But we've seen a lot of changes. A lot of CIOs, it was recognized during the pandemic what they bring to the organization and how many areas. The CIO is interestingly positioned to see every aspect of healthcare, because the technology touches every aspect of healthcare. It touches the data touches every aspect of healthcare, and so they have a unique perspective. And a lot of CIOs saw their roles expand. Anish Chopra came on, and at that time we were talking about 21st century cures and what that was going to mean. And one of the things that he's always said to me is, this is a long process. And sure enough, the rules for information blocking were just passed a little over a couple of weeks ago, and that's going to mean big motion. A couple of great women leaders in healthcare. Jamie Nelson was on, Sarah Richardson, Tressa Springman. And we talked about the consumer experience. We talked about the clinician experience. We talked about just a lot of different topics. They were phenomenal. Dale Sanders. We talked about having a data platform and whatnot. We talked about governance with David Muntz that first year. Chad Brizendine came on and actually shared a lot about building out a consumer experience. One of the things he had done was break apart the Epic MyChart platform and then built the wrapper around it. He was one of the early adopters of really building out that wrapper around it, and I think it paid dividends during the pandemic. And I could go on and on. I mean, Rod Hochman came on and talked about, one of the quotes I remember from him vividly was that he believes that the patient owns the medical record. It's a record about them, and they should own it. I think that was a fantastic conversation. Lee Milligan and I first met this year. I sort of picked up on him in social media. I reached out to him and said, "Hey, will you come on the show?" And he has since become a regular on the show, but really a great friend and someone I bounce ideas off of. Daniel Kraft. We talked about Singularity University, and we talked about the work that they are doing there. He has the Exponential Med Conference that's going on. It's the first time I was introduced to Nasser Nizami over at Jefferson. Craig Richardsville came on. Daniel Barchi came on, and a bunch of others. I'm just naming names, but I'm also trying to give you the topics. The topics tend to be the same topics, but with a little bit more progress than what we were talking about back then.
Yeah, I mean, it is incredible that not only do many of those names recur in 2020 for us, but 2021, because I know a lot of those individuals. And while I knew you in 2018, I was not listening to the show as religiously as I do now. So it is encouraging to see the community continue.
Let me give you an example of, we still talk, we talk about this all, we still talk about the moves of big tech, right? So Apple and Amazon. Every couple of weeks, we talk about something with Apple, Amazon, Google, you name it. They always keep coming up. And in that first year, we were talking about them. But in that first year, 2018, Apple introduced their medical record, and a lot of health systems signed on to that. And so for the first time, we were talking about getting your medical record out of the EHR down into your iPhone and being able to carry it around. So that's what we were talking about with Apple at that time. The big Amazon move in 2018 was the formation of Haven. And Haven, JP Morgan, Berkshire Hathaway, and Amazon came together to try to really change how large organizations handle care for their staff and for the population that works for them. And as you know, because you were around recently, that came to an end.
And it really is like a time capsule, but it's also a perspective. I mean, if you have the time, these episodes were shorter uh, than they are now. So going back and listening to a 20-minute where we were at 3-4 years ago is such a great perspective for, oh, how much progress have we made? Or are we still spinning our wheels on the exact same thing? It was interesting on one of the shows, it must have been the second episode, where you were sitting and talking about your experience coming into healthcare as a CIO and how you had to sit down for 8 hours straight with some of the smartest people in the room just to understand pricing in healthcare. And in that, you realize there is no way that the average American could understand pricing and what they're getting themselves into when they walk into the hospital. And that was such an interesting thing to hear, because the last two shows that we've just put out were around price transparency, and we just saw that CMS has issued clarifications around it, and it's we're still going because they realize maybe the average American doesn't have any clue either.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, it's our perspective on things evolve as well. So back then I was saying, it's got to be impossible for the consumer to understand their pricing. And by the way, I still believe that's true today. I think it's impossible, but I believe that's a problem that we need to solve. It shouldn't be that hard for them to understand the pricing. It's, when you get a bill with 55 line items, there has to be a way to simplify it. I just got a quote for redoing something, and it had the 55 line item things, but then it had a clear explanation of, this is what's happening, this is what you're paying for, this is we should be able to do that. And some health systems have spent the time to do that, to make the readable bill that the person can understand. So I still believe it's too complex, but I also believe it's a problem we can solve and should be able to solve.
Yeah, and that's the fun part for me coming into healthcare, because I have over 20 years of experience as a patient with chronic health issues, but I don't have 20 years of experience that a lot of the distinguished CIOs and health leaders have. And they have expertise that is beyond my comprehension, but they may not have the perspective, or as one of our guests recently put it, they might have access that a lot of average patients don't have. And so it is a great, I'm sure, great fun for you when I come to you with questions that may seem very simple, but I think they carry a lot of weight when you're not someone who's been inundated in industry knowledge for decades.
Well, the hardest thing is that you were a patient at the health system where I was a CIO. And
Yeah,
you'll say, hey, consumer experience, this was my experience. And I'll start saying things, well, you don't understand. That was really a medical group that was affiliated with us. It wasn't and you don't care, which is
I
which is
don't.
sort of the point. It's like that's the complexity that we have to work through. And yes, it's a medical group, but at the end of the day, it's still affiliated with us. It still has our name associated with it, and the experience should be a St. Joe's experience across the entire network. And that's
Right.
it's hard to pull off. I sometimes it might sound like I'm saying to the CIOs, come on, we can do better, but I understand how hard it is. It's hard.
Mm. Yeah. And it's equally difficult for building a consumer centric experience when there is so many complex issues on the other side, and it's almost as if we're requesting sympathy along with patronage. And it's that's why we're doing what we're doing, because we're not there yet. But speaking of these kind of big issues, when we think of key moments in 2018, key moments in 2019, before the pandemic and the acceleration that went alongside that, are there things that you look back on and say, "Oh, that was a big"? I know that coronavirus overshadows a lot, but before that, what were some moments?
Well, it's interesting because one of the things I do every year is I go to the JP Morgan conference, and that really frames up my perspective of what happened over the past year. Now, I cover a lot of it. I talk to a lot of people, but it's a vast industry. There's a lot going on. At the JP Morgan conference, you get to hear, I don't know, 16, 18 different CEOs and CFOs stand up there and say, hey, here's how we perform financially. So you get a sort of a snapshot of how the industry's doing. But then you also get hey, here's what we're doing strategically, and here's how we're moving forward. And it's interesting. 2019 was a year of everybody was racing. There was a lot going on, and it really came out of 2018. 2018 was a phenomenal year, really, for healthcare. There was a significant amount of reimbursement came from the Affordable Care Act. That came more reimbursement. In fact, that was one of the quotes from the JP Morgan conference that, and I believe it was the CFO for Intermountain said, 2018 will be known as the high water mark for reimbursement for healthcare. And I don't know if that was the case or not, but that's what he was saying, and he wasn't the only one saying it. There was a couple of themes in 2019. There was grow to greatness was kind of one of those themes in 2019, because again, we didn't have a pandemic. We were sort of looking at things were going to continue as normal, and you had significant acquisitions that year, and everyone was talking about mergers and are we going to end up with 5 large health systems in the country like we've ended up with 4 main payers in the country. And so there's this sort of grow to greatness mentality. That year, though, I'll be honest with you, I really focused it. I learned how different it is. And I knew this because I operated in the Southern California market. But when Bernard Tyson got on stage and started talking about their telehealth, and that 65% of their visits to Kaiser were telehealth visits, and it was over 1 million visits, that was sort of an interesting aha moment for me, that there's a different way to deliver care, but it's tied to the financial model. And Kaiser's able to do it because of the payer, the provider. It's a different model. But everywhere else, telehealth was struggling. And it was struggling because the financial model didn't match. Well, that changed in the pandemic. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit. The other thing is, the healthcare as a consumer was a big topic and has been a big topic for the last 2 years. And continues to be a big topic. When will the healthcare become a consumer is a whole nother question and sort of way of thinking. But health systems are trying to become more consumer centric and trying to make ways for people to experience care in a better way, less wait time, more convenience, more access, and all the things that entails, and maybe even access to services that they normally wouldn't have access to, behavioral health, nutrition, and those kind of things. So there's this focus on the healthcare consumer that is sort of permeating the whole industry as well. I will say that the thing that hasn't changed in healthcare is the margins aren't that great. I know it's hard to believe trillions of dollars going into healthcare, but the hospitals themselves operate on, I don't know, on good years, 3% to 12% margins, depending on the brand and name of the organization and the specialties that they have. On bad years, it's negative margins. And so there's always this do more with less that's been there for a fair amount of time. And, it just seems like that was the theme in 2018-19 was establish market essentiality, get bigger, get to scale. And there's this belief that if we get to scale, we're going to be able to do things that other health systems aren't going to be able to do. And we're going to be able to weather the storms because we have scale. And to a certain extent, some of that did play out during the pandemic. So those were some of the big themes, I guess, in 2018 and 2019.
Does that translate into the work that you were doing at This Week in Health IT? Did you try and expand bigger, better, greater? What were some of the changes that you took on with the format of the show during that same time frame?
Well, actually, a couple things happened that second year. The first year, when we brought people on, we did sort of a Newsday show with every CIO I brought on. They brought two stories, or they brought a story, I brought a story. That's what we talked about. And then I'd end the show with like a couple questions around, hey, what are you doing at your health system? What are you doing with regard to data interoperability? So it was a lot less of an interview show and a little bit more of a back and forth on the news show. Going into the second year, some of the feedback I got from CIOs were, it's really hard. I don't have the time to prepare for the show like that. And they found it to be easier to do an interview show. And so that's really what we did is we moved to a show called Influence, where we just interview them and we spend more time with them. You mentioned this earlier. The shows in the first year are shorter. We did a survey of people, and we've done that survey every year now. We'll probably do it. Well, we'll definitely do it every year. We might do it a little more often. But the feedback was interesting. One of the people said something that was really resonated with me, and then when I followed up with other people, they agreed with it, and that was, you might as well do a longer show, because when you get Ed Marks or when you get Rod Hochman or you get Darren Dworkin on the show, don't limit yourself to 20 minutes, because I'm going to listen to that show. I may not listen to all your shows, but when I listen to that show and you got them on the line, I talk to them as long as you can. I want to glean their wisdom. So they were saying to me, look, I'm okay with a 45-minute show. I'm okay with a 50-minute show. If it's interesting and you're talking to somebody that I'm interested to talk to. So we went to a little longer show. And then the other thing is, I realized because we did that, we lost our focus on the news and the issues of the day. And so we launched Newsday about halfway through that year. And, Newsday has become, we still do Newsday. We do it a little different this year, but we do the Today show as well. And that's just an effort to keep people current. And that's the short show. That's the one Today now is 6 minutes long, 7 minutes long. And you get a news story every day of the week and my commentary on that story. So that's the short show that people can stay current. And then we turned the Newsday show, this 2020 this year, and or 2021. I'm really enjoying this. Yeah, 2021. I'm really enjoying this. We turned the Newsday show now into a conversation with recurring guests. And so we have a handful of doctors that have been on, and they're going to keep coming on. Suchet comes on every 6 weeks or so. Drex DeFord is on every 6 weeks or so. Ann Weiler, former CEO for a health tech startup, comes on, and we have some great conversations as well. So I'm really enjoying discussing the news again with industry insiders. So that's one of the things. I think the other thing, and we'll have to actually, you and I are going to have to talk about this. We did conferences in a big way in 2019. We went to HIMSS and did about 12 interviews. We went to the Health Catalyst conference, talked to Dan Burton, the CEO. We've talked to Halamka, who was doing a keynote there. We talked to Rob DiMache, who's on their board, Dale Sanders, who was working for them at the time. We went to the Health 2.0 conference, met up with Don Rucker. Michael Pfeffer was there as well. Winji Mayo from Texas Health Resources was there. So we had some great conversations there. And then, went down to the health conference and talked to all the startups, and talked to Olive AI founder Sean Lane. We talked to Ginger. We talked to Pacific Dental founder, and he was talking about how dental and health are coming together, and they were implementing the Epic EHR across their entire platform. So we had some great conversations there. And then I think one of the most pathetic things I've ever done, I went to the Chime conference, and quite frankly, I just sat at a table outside the door of the main conference room and just let people know, hey, I'm doing interviews whenever you get a chance to sit down. Now, we did a lot of interviews, but there was an awful lot of time of me just sitting there. And I was like, I don't know if I'll ever do that again, but it was worth it because we had some, again, Joel Vanko stopped by, and James Brady stopped by, Mark Amy stopped by, Channy Cordero stopped by, Darren Dork and others. Cletus Earl stopped by, John Kravitz. So we had some phenomenal conversations, but it was that was a weird moment for me, just sitting at a table waiting for people to show up to do interviews, and everyone walking by going, hey, what are you doing? So anyway, yeah, we did conferences in a big way that year. That was one of the things that I guess we'll have to determine if we're going to do conferences in a big way going forward.
Yeah, that has been a conversation not only on our show, but it seems in the larger healthcare space is, are we going to be able to return to conferences, and do we want to, the way that they've been before? I mean, this conversation has happened time and time again, right? That the pandemic has disrupted the way that we have typically done things, whether it's work from home, whether it's remote conferences, and remote care. And the question being, how much value is there in that return to the brick and mortar face-to-face interaction, and how much can we glean and keep around from these digital and remote initiatives that have come out of it? And I guess that's kind of the natural next question. We've talked about 2018 and 2019. So the year that shall not be named, 2020, tragic in so many ways. And yet for healthcare, it seemed like it shocked the system in a way that it might have needed. Do you want to talk a bit about what 2020 really catalyzed in healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, the silver lining, and everyone talks about it. It's one of the questions I ask people now on a regular basis is, what's the lasting impact of the pandemic on health IT or your health system? And they will invariably talk about the rise of telehealth. They'll talk about the work from home and the recognizing what's possible. They did things this past year. We did things as an industry this past year that people didn't think were possible. And so it sort of opened up our minds to what we could do. Digital transformation happened in a big way this year. We implemented chatbots and remote consults, and you name it. We did amazing things from a technology standpoint this year, and we learned what we can do with focus. And that was that's probably if we talk about the lasting impact, it will be conversations a year from now where people go, you know what? And I know this is going to happen. We're going to fall back into some of our old habits. But a year from now, someone's going to stand up in a meeting and go, I want to move as fast as we did during COVID, during the pandemic. And I hope somebody who's listening to this show raises their hands and say, I know exactly what we need to do. We need to focus. Bill and guests talked about this over and over again. What enabled us to move this quickly? It was a clear focus on the safety of our communities, the safety of our clinicians, and the safety of our patients. And we rallied very quickly around that singular focus. We put all the extraneous stuff to the side and said, these are the 7, these are the 10, these are the 15 projects that we are going to focus on for the next 7 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. If we could just do that twice a year, we would make far more progress than we do with 150 projects on our plate. And so that's one of the things I think is going to be the coming out of this is going to be the legacy of the pandemic. We learned a lot of things. It also exposed a lot of gaps, to be honest with you, in public health infrastructure, in the way we interact with the community. I felt like early on in the pandemic, we did an awful lot of shaming people for doing things that are normal behavior, not in a pandemic. But instead of trying to win people over, we
clubbed them over the head with, do you not understand that this is a pandemic? You shouldn't be doing these things. And it got very political. And I, to the extent that we could be, a conduit to make, to move past that, we tried to do that and have the conversations in a non-political way. I had David Benzema on during the COVID series. And one of the things we decided to do was I was going to play the skeptic and he was going to play my primary care physicians. And I was just going to ask him questions, this is happening in New York, but it's not happening in my community. Should I even care about this fire? We just had the conversation and hopefully, just had a dialogue that got, the conversation out there of what people could do. One of the things that happened in 2021 for us, our numbers went through the roof in 2021. We did almost 230,000 downloads of the podcast alone. The videos were getting about 2,000 every 30 days, 2,000 views every 30 days. So it went through the roof. And I think what happened for us is we became the conference, right? You couldn't go to a conference. And if you wanted to hear from Don Rucker, if you wanted to hear from, I don't know, Lee Milligan, if you wanted to hear from just any number of these great leaders, Stan Banerjee, David Chow. I mean, gosh, hey, you know what? Our pictures got a lot smaller. I need my glasses on and whatnot. But we became the conference. I had a number of people say to me, hey, thanks for doing the show. I learned what that health system was doing. That helped us to really, think through this. Or I got a bunch of emails while doing the COVID series specifically, but I still get them today of, hey, do you know a health systems that's doing this? And I make connections all the time because I'm talking to these people and they may not have listened to that episode. I'll say, yeah, we talked about that on the show. These two health systems are doing that. You might want to reach out to them. We highlighted the mass vaccination events that were done really effectively at University of Colorado Health and at Atrium, which were two organizations that did a phenomenal job. The UC Health document, I was so happy to be able to share that with the community and get that out there. So I think we became the conference, and I hope we still become the conference, because at the end of the day, I had 700-800 people that I was responsible for keeping current. And I don't know, I sent maybe 50 of them to a conference every year. And so for the rest of them, this would have been a great outlet to hear from these industry leaders as if they were sitting there having a keynote and those kind of things. So I don't know if I answered your question. Did I answer your question? I got going there a little bit.
Oh, it was so long ago, Bill. I'm not sure I remember.
This is my day. I do a show and then I get critiqued every day. Oh, anyway,
no,
necessary.
I have the power of the editing button. Don't worry. Yes, 2020. That was the question, and what was catalyzed during that time. And I think you addressed that you saw focus, that there was a pressure almost. There was an external pressure far greater. There's a bit of insulation in healthcare now where the provider and the health system is set back a bit from customer demand, right? I mean, that's why we struggle to be patient centric, is there isn't that feel of supply and demand that might drive other industries. And perhaps this has been a catalyst for us to recognize that. And as you talk about conferences and what's next, yes, I would love if people kept tuning into us and saw this as that same resource. And we won't tilt our hand on what's going on behind the scenes, but who knows? Let's start rumors on our own show.
Who knows what's going on? Maybe we might be changing things. No, it's interesting. There's because you've asked me this question. We've talked about this. It's like, are you going to run out of things to talk about? Because it seems like we're talking about the same things, but there is nuance to what we're talking about. The cybersecurity. We used to talk about cybersecurity in the, let's not lose any records. That would be a problem. And, you get the fine and you have to send out the identity protection paperwork to everyone that you lost their record and those kind of things. That's how we were talking about it in 2018. And should we pay ransomware? Should we not pay ransomware? Was a big, conversation. 2019, it got a little more serious. Late 2020, early 2021, it got really serious. They can shut down your hospital serious. you can lose all the medical images that you've ever done serious. And for the first time at the JP Morgan conference, at least a half dozen or more CEOs got up and said, cybersecurity is one of our greatest concerns right now, and it's an area of focus. And so it changes, it changes the lens, it changes the conversation. And now we're talking about, what does a chief information security officer look like in 2021 when the CEO wants to talk to them on an ongoing basis and they are involved in business decisions moving forward. And, I think that's one indication. 21st Century Cures, back when we talked to Anish for the first time, way back when, was sort of like, yeah, it was passed. No one really knows what it's going to be. This is generally the direction we're going to go. We need to make sure that the medical record gets freed up. It needs to get in the hands of the consumer. It needs to be accessible by the innovation community so that we can make some progress and those kind of things. We need to sort of free it from the hands of those that are unwilling to share it. And so we knew, in essence, what it was going to be. The next year, 2019, in 2020, we saw really bipartisan support behind it of people. The best was at HIMSS, where you had 4 administrations on the stage with Seema Verma, essentially affirming the direction of 21st Century Cures and the sharing of information. And then we had the rules around information blocking, which just went into effect about a week and a half ago. And so the conversation went from, hey, we don't really know what this is, we don't really have to do much about it, to, oh my gosh, what does this mean? I mean, there's now like a whole mechanism in place that if I write an app that requests information from my health system on my medical record and they don't provide it, I mean, I should just put a button there that says, tell CMS. And they hit that button and it transmits to CMS and says, hey, they're participating in information blocking. They're not providing the record. It's more sophisticated than that. I get it. I've reported on it several times, but I think this is the year that we start to see really these innovators make progress on top of that regulation for the first time. And so I think the other thing is, we talk about big tech and we talk about these new entrants into the market. They're getting more sophisticated, and they're really finding their swim lanes. Amazon has found its swim lane, and they're going down this Amazon Care model because they're going to build something for their employees first. If they do it and they do it effectively, they will expand it and they will offer it as a service outside of Amazon. But if they do it and it's just okay, they may not expand it. So, but they're finding their swim lane. They're like, hey, we're good here. They're also good in supply chain, right? They can get stuff anywhere in the world very quickly. They're good at, making sure that resources are where they need to get to when they get there. So they are finding their swim lane. Microsoft, the arms dealer, is finding their swim lane. They are acquiring Nuance. They have a new set of tools that they're going to sell into healthcare, and they're going to continue to morph and create more tools, right? So it's AI, it's machine learning, it's different things that they're going to be selling in. Google understands that they're an information and data company, and that's what they're doing. They're trying to make sense of the medical record. And so they've partnered with several health systems. The most notable is Ascension and their 100 hospitals, and they're bringing the medical record in and they're creating an overlay for the clinicians on the clinician side, but they will also be creating an overlay for the patient side that will likely act as a personal health record or a patient portal of sorts for them. And then Apple is a consumer company, and actually probably one of the slower moving of those 3 that we talked about. They're very methodical. They're really about selling devices, and they want to increase the utility of their devices. And so when you look at it, they still have the Apple medical record and probably have a significant amount of data in that medical record. But and they have the Apple Watch that has some FDA approved monitoring that's going on there. But they move slow to the extent that they can increase the value of the devices that they're selling. That's what they're going to do. They're never really going to be a healthcare company per se, even though that's the way they talk from the executive level. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it today. It would be, but it will be some sort of device. They're going to sell some sort of device and they're going to be the mechanism. So the conversation is moving forward. It's not moving at the pace maybe that we want it to move, but it's moving forward for sure.
Right. Well, I think you covered where we're going in 2021. That gets us from 2018 when this launched to where we're at now. And those conversations, big tech, digital acceleration, the role of the CIO, where it's going, all of that. Well, not a spoiler, but an insight for our listeners. If you're a reader, there's some great featured content coming out on our site around those exact topics in the coming months. So hopefully we can pull together our conversations around those exact conversations on our show and put them all in one place for you.
So Tess,
Well,
what are you going to be doing in 2021?
what am I going to be doing? I'm not sure.
I mean, This Week in Health IT, you've written your first article. You have your first article out there. You're editing a bunch of articles. Talk a little bit about that work.
Yeah, so I think that we had our first conversation when we were writing our first what we're doing here over a year ago, Bill, when you and I met. We realized that This Week in Health IT serves as a resource, right? We saw that during COVID, that it's a resource for individuals that are going through something at their health system and they want to see what other health systems are going through. COVID, again, a great example of that. And it's also true with cybersecurity and these new regulations getting rolled out from the White House, from Capitol Hill. And it's important for, I think, that collaboration to exist because it helps us refine focus. And what we realized in the last few months is that a great swath of those people who can use this as a resource are a lot of people who have existed in the IT space or have gone directly from university to get a master's in health administration, public health, anything that they're going to end up in these very roles. And they're going right now and learning in college. And guess what? We are a perfectly free and extreme resource for all of those conversations from health leaders. And so a big initiative that we have upcoming is making sure that we are informing not only health leaders, but as our mission states, the next generation of health leaders. And so we have a big push coming to make sure that these conversations that were happening now are very involved with up and coming leaders so that they will have these priorities and these values that we're discussing about, being patient centric, about being fast paced and agile, all those things. We want to instill those in the next generation. So that's a big push for us. Among all the other hats that I wear, that is what you can expect consuming me for probably the next 6 months.
Well, thanks for joining the mission. We talk about the mission a lot. Actually, it's pretty interesting.
It's almost as if it's a mission statement.
because it is a mission statement. As you keep reminding me, it is a mission statement.
It should guide every aspect of your organization, but I could go on my marketing soapbox and how it influences healthcare for much longer. That's a different show, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's this thing that goes on in healthcare where people are like, vendors shouldn't make money. No one should make money in healthcare except for people providing care. And right or wrong, I don't really subscribe to that. If you're adding value, there should be money. But so somebody said to me, I can't believe you're making money from this. And I'm like, well, first of all, we didn't take a sponsor until like episode 300, or at least 200. The first 2 years we had no sponsors whatsoever, so we just did it and incurred all the costs associated with it. And then since then, we've hired 6 people. So it's not like, and we have 9 sponsors. It's not like nobody's retiring on this. This is pretty much, we're doing it for the mission. We really are. And to be honest with you, this thing is fueled by emails. It's fueled by comments on social media posts, and we're sharing them with each other all the time. Like, hey, this is really cool. This student just reached out. We had a professor reach out to us, say, hey, I use your materials in our class. We had a student reach out and say, my professor assigned a couple of your interviews in our class. They're phenomenal. I really appreciate it. We've had emails from people saying, thanks for sharing that, sharing those stories, sharing that, doing this. And we were fueled by that. So feel free to send us notes. We love it. It really does keep us going.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
when I have to explain to people, oh, wait, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to wrap us up. I
was going to wrap us up after my charming anecdote. I will chop this out. What I was going to say, when I am explaining to people what I do for a living, it's kind of a complicated thing that we have going on here. But when I'm talking to just my friends in my normal life, I'm able to say, have you ever walked in to your doctor's appointment and gotten handed a clipboard with 10 sheets of paper? Have you ever sat in a waiting room for 2 hours? Have you ever sat on hold with your doctor? I'm working to make sure that you never have to do that again. And apparently that means something to them when I say that I do marketing for a podcast and a media site. It's a little less impactful, but when you remember what you're doing it for, then it really helps hone it in.
Yep. And it's exciting to hear the stories of how that's progressing forward. We just talked to Kevin Manneman, who said, one of the legacies of the pandemic is we got rid of most of the clipboards in our health system. And I'm like, yes, Tess can tell people this health system she used to go to got rid of most of the clipboards. So
most of them.
I'm not sure he said all, so I'm going to have to go back and listen to the transcript. I'm pretty sure he did not say all. So it is what it is.
Well, we're making progress.
Making progress. That's what it's about. Progress every day, as we always talk about. All right. That's all for today. If you know of someone that might benefit from our channel, please forward them a note. They can subscribe on our website, thisweekhealth.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Google, Overcast, Spotify, Stitcher, and whatever else comes out next, we'll figure out a way to get on it. We want to thank our channel sponsors once again, who are investing in our mission to develop the next generation of health leaders: VMware, Hillrom, Starbridge Advisors, McAfee, and Aruba Networks. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.